Well, hello, world. I'm Brian Stratton, and I am what people call a behavioral economist. And for a lot of people, that means that I might be able to help them build some better behavior and help them get from A to B. And as much as I've studied that for 20 years, and I found that I know less than I thought I knew at the beginning, I found that the entire system isn't so much driven by behavior, it's driven by things like the illusion of choice. If we can dive into that a little bit further, what most people see is incentive and behavior, but that's not always so much the case. And so as I went out to the fringes where there isn't a lot of money and there's a lot of very brilliant people, I ended up seeing a lot of people who were not able to take care of themselves. And I was one of those people. I was very lonely, and society didn't work for me very well. So the problem was I hadn't figured out how to work well for society, and to become a custodian and truly do something something that I thought was valuable and meaningful. It's a hard thing to do. So I had heard about this story called the Stone Soup, and I had also connected with some people here in Chicago called Mike Moyer from Slicing Pie. And by the way, his work is very interesting. And so I've always tried to support him and other people in this space. I got into DAOs. I did a lot of very interesting work. And I found that we were able to help hundreds of millions in projects get off the ground just by showing people that they didn't need money to get their projects going. They could attract world-class talent, but it was more on kinship and less on the path of profit. And as much as there are many roads to Rome, the one where you have always just been valued for what you can do doesn't get you kinship. In fact, you're probably brought in, if you're a lot like what I used to be, just when there's a fire to fight. Like, you're really world class at what you do. I've set some world records. I bring people together. I've built many world class teams. And so the opportunity was, all right, how do I go from just my value on teams to actually having a deep sense of brotherhood, sisterhood, peoplehood, kinship with other people? And when we look at the story of the Stone Soup, we have guitars and all these kinds of things playing. There's a fire and music and laughter, and so people, of course, would like to join your community, your Stone Soup, your project that you're building. And so I found a lot of engineers who felt like they didn't know how to sell to the world or felt very exploited. And so we built the kitchen, which is our governance layer, and then a layer for contributors, and then a layer for our community. And so this is a governance, participation, and consumption layer. And then, balancing this off of like Eleanor Ostrom, Nobel Prize kind of commons governments, and like just a whole bunch of stuff down the list here, down all the way through Web3 tokenomics kind of stuff. It was, and by the way, thank you MIT Token Engineering Group. It's amazing the kind of work you guys are doing. Not everybody belonged in the kitchen is what I found. And in fact, I didn't belong in leadership at that point. I was still really struggling to do something very meaningful in my life. And then I really started to see, okay, well, we've got these value creators and beneficiaries. And then when I start creating value for the beneficiaries, other governance people or other people in the same level arches as me, let's say at the providing the roof for the building instead of working inside the factory, which is that everybody's needed. All roles are needed to make the whole thing happen. It was very interesting how I started getting into Adam Grant's work and looking at how give and take affects that. Whenever there's a giver, there's a taker. And if you're listening to this right now, imagine somebody who couldn't give to you that year that you gave to them, but maybe a couple years later they came back, or maybe they still are. Maybe you're still hoping for that. But these giver-taker kind of, and then governance layers are necessary. It actually keeps the whole thing going because we find meaning out of it. And that's really interesting. So let's step a little bit further into that. I know some people would add like a little bit of monitoring and more consequences to this. And that's that might not be a good case, because if we look at Hayek or pre-Austrian economics, it shows us that design usually becomes a Frankenstein. We look at Mao Zedong. You give people who generally don't know how to handle power, they'll radicalize more than you could possibly ever imagine. So the stone is the last thing that we've left out in the stone soup, where the stone is the inedible thing. It's like the compass, it's the barometer, it's the sextant, it's like in our community is give first, right? But give strategically. That's generally the barometer that we follow. And we follow a tit for tat game theory approach, where our stages, for example, where the whole community tries to help somebody, like the person who gave the most that week. Those stages can't be bought. Now, we can take sponsors into those environments. We're still tuning some of our own community stuff, but let's go over like the structural stuff here that is actually unique in the world, and is the first time that I think anybody has ever recorded this. So I'm very excited for you guys to join in this first release here. So we can go over incentives and those kinds of things, and like core concerns. I've even worked with like some princes and some people looking at like better coming of age processes. But I'll read you what I just recorded, and then I haven't really looked over what some of the LLMs I have are here that are assisting me, or any of the other agent stuff that we have in the background. I haven't really looked at what they're going to say about it, but I know what we're doing, nobody else has done in the world, combine some of these different elements into a new governance structure that is very fascinating. And there might be a link to this, but my economic theory, as it will probably emerge in society, is on YouTube as well. So there might be a link to that in the channel. Not sure, but you can always check out Brian Stratton on YouTube, or whatever the heck my account name is, and just we're making awesome stuff. That's it. So here we go. Now here's the thing, when I look at a social contract like Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau, I find that people will return to the natures that we allow them to. And thus far throughout society, there has generally been few people who have set the cadence, which is fine, but that generally was towards some kind of labor goal and not so much awakening. And what binds all that together is presence, right? Those are more the expressions of presence, right? The idea of goals versus awakening people to achieve their own goals. The idea of providing a shelter for people to be under versus teaching them how to make their own jackets to go out and make more shelters and jackets for other people. And so it seems as though unless we do the awakening now with the way that society is coping, we will hold on to power by a central group, and then we will just, as I wrote it here, end up screwing ourselves over as an entire species. So, in less vulgar terms, what we will end up devising here today together and understanding is been affected by Robin Dunbar and Nietzsche and Nobel laureates, and thank you Kahneman and Tversky, and thank you Solzhenitsyn and Fractal, and just thank you so much. All right, so here we go. So what we end up devising based on Robin Dunbar and the rule of 150 is this kind of self-forking mechanism based on the ability of decision-making, which we could think of as actually the speed of learning for the organization. And when you end up losing coherence in a organization, like a coherence ratio, you know, things aren't getting done, nobody's understanding each other. Like, these are actual human expressions that we see in organizations all over the world. So you have a low coherence ratio, and what you should do, and companies like Patagonia have shown this, you should split. Now, granted, there can be other organizations inside of this during the contributor and beneficiary layers of society, not so much just where this is, where the governance structure. But you can have a JP Morgan that has a bunch of centralized decision making and is more built for like compliance and consistency. And trust me, if I'm looking at a bank, I don't want a big creative think tank kind of group of people running a bank. It's not, even as one of those people, I wouldn't encourage that. So those kinds of things can exist in the contributor layer and beneficiary layers. But in this one, you're generally going to want to be forking based on the coherence layer. And so let's lay this out with other economic theory that I've presented about how setting up local municipal funds and this is what the video that I mentioned earlier is on, setting up local municipal funds where people can supplement their Social Security through their own merit and effort and those kinds of things. One, we love this here in the US. Two, it's a really great signaling system that we've used since the dawn of time. And if we're going to make the jump over the chasm, we have to strap, even if we have a jetpack on, to the backs that we've always had, the bodies that we've always had. We have to generally acknowledge what's been there before, and we'll get to that in just a second with some Nietzsche. So with these municipal funds, people can really contribute, not just have their federal Social Security, but have local municipal that maybe would issue bonds or those kinds of things. And let's say that we could take this structure all the way up to a sovereign body, like how the decision making is run, how it splits. And that isn't so much about physical location. It would be that we'd have an entire world where people could vote with their feet. We wouldn't have to necessarily change geographic borders, but the people that are governing them, citizenship, would become a lot more fluid across the board. So you're just going to have more branches. If you're a local municipal and you never hit 150, you never have to bifurcate, do a self-fork, fine, no big deal. If you want to take it all the way up to running like the US government, you'd end up having a lot of forks, and you'd end up having, or like all of Europe or something like that, or all the world, you'd have a lot of forks, like a link tree, if you know what that is. It's basically a maze that if you unravel the maze, it would look like a big link tree. So, all right. So as an add-on, that's something that complements to the old strategy is what I've said. If we had jetpacks, we'd still have to put them on our backs, right? The thing that our body, our previous state. And Nietzsche talked about that in the Metamorphose, where essentially an add-on is something that complements an old strategy without throwing the wisdom of that. And we can work Nietzsche's dragon in here, which is the thing that tries to stop all new things from happening, and as a preservation of the old world, right? Like sort of what you'd want a bank to be, right? Sort of locked in place, not too unpredictable, those kinds of things. And so Nietzsche's dragon doesn't like new creative thinking, or it isn't so much that, it's that its job is to make it hard. And I think he was a lot of times talking about God here in the sense of like, is it cruel that he put us on this world? If that's true, or the quantum field, or whatever the case is that you believe in, are we put here because that's just a cruel kind of judgment, or were we trusted enough to become wise? That's a very critical thing here. So can we work with Nietzsche's dragon? Then comes to mind, right? Can we work with the unknown? And we don't have to, right? Where in his theory, when you become the child, you can bring these new tablets of values into the world, and so you would then be able to create the whole new world, and you don't need the old folks before. But again, I wouldn't throw the baby out with bathwater. That's not smart. And take a look at the Cultural Revolution and like 40 million people dying with Mao Zedong, and see what happens when you give a bunch of people who don't know about power. They radicalize more than you could ever possibly. It's the scariest thing you could imagine, right? In the middle of the night, they're going to come and take you. Just don't worry. You're not alone. It will happen to you for sure. It'll happen to me. It'll happen to everybody if we're foolish enough to give the wrong people power. And giving the wrong people power, like a Elizabeth Holmes or a Bernie Madoff moment, or Nixon, or these impeachment people, they show us then if nothing bad ever happens, nothing ever changes. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's necessary. It's as it should be. And so when we can accept that, then it isn't so much about choice, it's actually more about presence. And so we can work with that structure, we can work with those previous ways of doing things. In fact, that's the only place we have to start from, is where we have right now. We can't be wanting for a different world. Like, let's say it's an ugly baby. And I love babies, but let's say it's an ugly baby. It's our baby. It's my baby. You know, it's your baby. You don't throw the baby out just because you think it's ugly. That's what a machine would do. That's not what humans do. We step beyond that, right? We know what the idea of good quality, utility is, coming back to the beginning of the conversation. And we see in Hayek's work that in a local microeconomy, those people determine generally what the best value is of things. It's very different in the fields of Bulgaria and Romania, on the border between the two, in little towns that have almost no support, to Chicago here, where things are valued very differently. So we can't get rid of the old dragon, but we can help it find its peace in history and all parts of the future. And I don't want to go too quantum on that, but the existence that we have now is sort of like a glass of food coloring. We each get to add our own drops into it, and those do remain. We may not be remembered for that specific drop. I don't know how all that works or why it does. But it definitely produces a tint to the water. And then eventually, if we take it all the way to the end of the universe, everything becomes black. You just add enough drops of food coloring in the glass, and the whole thing becomes black. So that's going to happen anyways. We might as well make this the absolute best we can while we're here. Our human nature is what it is, and Locke and Hobbes had a lot of really good points. I think we're in more of a Rousseau kind of social contract these days. And what I'll put at here is, what we've combined today is Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, Dunbar, Nietzsche's three metamorphoses. The tree of life, right? Because of each of these are like a tree of life that are connected at the root, where each of these groups that they split up into. And people vote with their feet, with alignment, right? They're generally always seeking alignment and trying to reconverge with some sense of truth. There's old parables like this, like birds of a feather flock together. So then we've shown today how municipal, state, and sovereign, and even transnational funding structures would happen. And that your speed of learning is actually your basis of legitimacy, or you just won't be competitive. And some people call it getting eaten by the bear, so you don't want that to happen. And then you really must start seeing awakening, or teaching people how to cope with the current reality in a fashion that they can take care of themselves, which is the ultimate form of giving, even into our most ancient traditions. Awakening is an economic and survival requirement at this point, like an absolute requirement. So without this, every power that you can imagine will be exploited by the fastest people and not the wisest. You just got to roll with it. You just got to be okay with it. Doing some of my most precious work in the world and balancing that with the joys of being a father is a difficult thing. So without awakening, quantum, AI, nuclear, drones, all these kinds of things, they will be exploited. Now, they will be exploited by the fastest, not the wisest people. So society will also fragment into tribes of fear, not communities of reason. And institutions will slow down and become violently reactive. We're already seeing this kind of stuff. And then the old tablets, like defaulting to something you know isn't healthy, but you just don't know any better, society will default back in a resurge of panic. That will happen. Only a custodial group of people, it doesn't even have to be centralized, but it is now, and it would then start breaking off. Only that group of people with that coherence, discipline, and a shared awakening can hold the line long enough for the rest of society to rise with them. It's the only thing that's possible. Coherence ratio is defined by shared values, shared direction, and shared meaning, divided by coordination complexity. All right? So think about that. Think about Robin Dunbar's work of the Rule of 150. Feel free to leave me your comments here. So the custodianship roots the tree. Municipal, regional, national, sovereign, they grow it. And those underground connected values, those standards of learning, that's what connect us all together. That's the network of roots. But they're distinct in how they flower. Each tree is different, right? It has its own culture across the board. The roots are one, the trunks are many, and the fruits are local. So the only thing that's holding you back in your life is what you know, and you've probably been told you have to be this way, thou shalt, like Nietzsche's dragon. And so you have to become a lion and say, I will do this. And the child creates the new world by saying, I am. Thank you. Ask comments. Feel free to reach out. We're going to be doing some work with a couple of different countries and starting up most likely a number of distributed self-replicated communities, and working with everybody from your local farmer to a sovereign body. If you've got the right intention and commitment and determination and resources to work with us, feel free to reach out. Thank you, everyone. And this is one of the gifts that I can offer. Let's set our structures up in society for better success. That's it. Let me and other people like me help you to find more opportunity in your life, because that's all I wish to do, is to lay out the opportunity for more complexity, more complication, more beauty, more expression, more things we didn't expect, and yet being able to handle that at the same time. So we need both guardrails, and we need something like Jacob's Ladder. So thank you guys. Have a great day.